All right, welcome back from the nesting video. Let's go ahead and actually create something applicable here. So I'm going to just make some space to work just because I like a lot of extra space. And again, white space doesn't matter. We know that, right? So let's create a new paragraph in here and let's automatically close that paragraph tag. And in here, let's write lorem, hit tab, and we get some lorem ipsum, just like we've done before. Now, if we want to bold some text, you think it would be the word bold. It's not quite that intuitive, but it's pretty close. We just use the B tag. So we could do B, and let's bold the first 4 letters, or words rather. And so I've got a P tag, a paragraph, and nested as a child element is the bold element. And so I saved that, and if I go over to Google Chrome and hit refresh, you can actually see that my text here is bold and the rest is not bold. Okay, so this is nesting, and this is actually getting into something a little more interesting, a little more useful, a little more applicable to actually learning HTML. Next, let's go ahead and let's italicize. So italicize to make something sort of, actually this is a good example. Whatever I did there made this italics. So it's sort of kind of handwriting-ish. Let's go ahead and add an I element to these 3 words. And so if I refresh the page, which ones do we have here? Culpa iustu, I'm not even gonna try to say that, but it's these 3 words here. And if I hit refresh, we can see that that has now automatically changed. Lastly, we have underline, and really it's the exact same thing. So you'd think it would be underlined, but it's not. We use sort of shorthand when it comes to HTML, and we just say U. It's the U element. And again, that has an opening and closing tag. All 3 of these have opening and closing tags. So I'm going to save that, come back here, hit refresh, and we can see this is now underlined. Now, where this gets really, really interesting is we can create another paragraph and lorem, and you see how fast this is getting because I have that tab completion. If I wanted to make this bold, italic, and underlined, and let's just get rid of this. Let's do only 1 line instead of 2 or 3 sentences there. Let's just do 1 sentence. I could say B, hit tab, makes bold for me. And then it wants me to put my text in here. Well, that's nice, but what I'm going to do here is just grab all of that. I'm going to hit Control X or Command X on Mac. That just cuts it into my clipboard. And then Control V or Command V, as in violet, to paste. And so when I save, refresh, we're going to see we now have a bold sentence. Now, if we wanted to make this italics as well, it's not BI for bold italics, it's just B, and then inside of it, we say I. So then we can go over here, hit tab to indent that some more, and /I. One thing to note too is your text might actually scroll way off the screen over here. You can go into your settings and you can change your word wrapping or your text wrapping settings so that it breaks automatically onto a new line. So you can see that this whole thing for me is line 27, even though it's spanning multiple lines. That's just so it's not one long line right across the page and I have to scroll left and right. Okay, so I added a paragraph, bold, italics. Let's go ahead, save and refresh. And now this is bold and italicized. So that's working out pretty nicely. Lastly, let's add a U element, and I just move that text up real quick. Go ahead, save that file, refresh, and now we can see it's bold, italic, and underlined. But there is a rule here. Your inner tag, your innermost tag, has to have an innermost closing tag. So if the last one you have is a U, the first closing tag is a U. If the second element that you have here is an I, the second last one is a /I. Same thing with bold. So we start with bold up here and we close, and you can actually see, and this is why I indented it like this, is so that you can see that these match up this way. You always want your elements to match up this way. Funny things can happen if you don't match your opening and closing tags. That's pretty important. So at this point, if you want to go ahead and give this a shot, let's try nesting a paragraph. So create a paragraph element, then bold your text, italicize your text, underline your text, and it doesn't matter if it's bold, italic, or underline, or any other order. It could be italic, underline, bold. It could be underline, bold, italic. It doesn't really matter as long as these match up. And then add some text in there. And I want you to make sure that your text is both, or not both, but all. It should be bold, italic, and underlined, and it should be in a paragraph element. Go ahead and give that a shot. Once you're ready to move on, I'll see you in that next lesson. Okay, hello, and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about a div element. So what I want to do here is I have a bunch of code already, and I just want to collapse it so it's a little more readable for me, because this is getting fairly long. And get rid of that extra white space, just because I like my code being tidy. And if we wanted to, we could like collapse just the I, just the B, just the paragraph. But in this lesson, let's go ahead and talk about div. Div is a dummy element, and it actually doesn't mean anything. So like how we said P stands for paragraph, B stands for bold, I stands for italic, div is just a divider. And you can actually see that the MDN reference here from VS Code says the div element has no special meaning at all. It represents its children. It can be used with class, lang, and title attributes to mark up semantics, comment, blah, blah, blah. That stuff's getting a little too advanced for us at the moment. But basically that first line that says the div element has no special meaning at all. That's important. It has no special meaning. Now, what we're going to talk about here is A, div has no special meaning. This has no special meaning. But let's also take a look at how it works side by side, because in this last lesson where we did bold, italics, and underline, we could use all three of these. And actually a better example is this one where we had a paragraph, but then we had bold, and that bold text was beside the regular text. And then we had italics, and that italicized text was right beside the normal text, and the underlined text, same thing over and over and over again. And this gets into this concept of block elements versus inline elements. So a div is a block element. And what I mean by that is if I just hit Command C or Control C, and then Command V or Control V, I just copied that whole line over, and this is a second line. So let's go ahead and save that. Refresh our page here, and you can see down here, it just says, this has no special meaning, this is a second line. And if I do this, right click and inspect, when I hover over the element, you can actually see that that blue line that goes right across the entire page, that is a block element. So even though it's only actually needing the space from this has no special meaning, you can actually see that it's taking up the entire line. That's called a block element. And you're going to see these all the time because it's really good to know. The reason for that is because, for example, if this paragraph up here was not a block element, these two paragraphs would merge together and they wouldn't actually be paragraphs. It'd be one paragraph merged with the second paragraph to make one big one. That's not what we want all the time. And so the nice thing about this paragraph is also a block element, is it's going to take up the full width of your screen. It's going to take up as much real estate as it possibly can. So let's go back to our code and let's even try to put these side by side in our code. So it's opening one div and closing it, opening another div and closing it. Let's go ahead and save that, refresh, and we're going to see that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Literally nothing has changed. And that's again because these are block elements. So our browser said, okay, you have one element, it's closing, another element, it's closing. In the inspect tool, this is exactly what our browser sees. This has been fixed for us. So it's on two different lines. And again, they're both block elements. So they're going to take up as much possible space as they can, separated by the element itself. Now, this is a strange concept, but in the next lesson, we're going to talk about block elements versus inline elements and how you can use them sort of together and what the difference is. Okay, let's take a look at block elements versus inline elements. So far, we've been working with mostly block elements. Now, a block element is if I right-click and inspect, you can see that it takes up the entire width of my page. Even though it's actually only using, 30% of the text, it's actually saying, allocate the entire width of the page for this particular H2 element. Paragraphs are block elements as well. H3s, H4, 5, 6, even the H1 at the very top of the page. But what isn't is if we go down here, we have this particular paragraph with nested elements. Now the nesting has nothing to do with it. What's important to note is that this B element for bold it's not taking up the entire width of the entire page. It's actually sitting side by side with your regular text. And then we have italics, regular text, underline, and then some more regular text. Now, underline, italic, and bold, these are called inline elements. And all that means is they can exist side by side with other elements. Whereas paragraph, you can see that I only have text up until about here. If I hover over this, to the right of where I selected that text, it's still taking up that extra space. That's a block element. Now, you do not need to have inline elements inside of a block element, though typically that is what you're going to end up doing, but there's no rule for that. It's just, this is an inline element, and we could put italics right beside bold, right beside underline. It doesn't really matter because it's an inline element, so it's going to take up the least amount of space possible. Versus block elements, like down here, this div is a block element, this div is a block element, and it's going to take up the entire width. Now, a couple use cases is, bold, italic, and underline, but also, if you wanted a block element, you could use a title, like in H1 through H6, and that's going to put your larger text on its own line. And so what's nice about that is we already have a title here, Welcome to HTML 101. We've got a subtitle here using an H2 element, and then we have a couple of paragraphs. These are all block elements, and this is what's making our page look nice. Now, if, for some reason, this bold were a block element, and I'm going to show you what this is going to look like, but don't try this. I don't want you to try this because this is breaking out of the scope of HTML, but I'm going to show you what this looks like. Display block. So what I just wrote there, you don't need to try. But I changed it. I hijacked its default behavior to be block instead of inline. And you can see that bold is now on its own line. And this is why inline elements are very important, because if you have bold on its own line, you'll never actually have the ability to select a particular piece of text in a paragraph and make it bold, underline, or italic. Now, there are a lot of different elements out there that are inline, and there's a lot of them that are block. And so you're going to have to sort of discover these as you move through learning HTML. There's too many elements to possibly cover. There's probably hundreds of them. But for the most part, you're going to use a handful of them pretty much every single day. And you need to know the difference between a block element, like this one that I hijacked, or an inline element, so that you can actually make your text presentable in a human readable manner. So that's the difference between block elements and inline elements. Okay, so the web is made of links to other pages. That's really all it is. So I have one page here, but what if I wanted to link to Google? Or what if I wanted to link to another page of mine? First things first, let's start off by using the most simple form. Let's just link to Google or Facebook or Instagram or something like that. So in this lesson, we're going to create two different types of links. The first one, and I just flipped over to VS Code here. The first one is going to be a link just to Google. And this is an absolute link. The second one is going to be a relative link. So a link starts with the A element, and this stands for anchor. It's a hypertext anchor. We can see that over here. Thank you, VS Code, for filling that in for me. So we have an anchor tag, and this actually uses our first attribute. We haven't used an attribute yet. And that's going to be href, and that stands for a hypertext reference. And basically, this is how we're going to point to another web page. Now, it's been a little while, but an attribute is always the attribute name, equal, and then either quotations or apostrophes. They have to start and end with the same. It doesn't matter which one you use, but it has to start and end with the same. And let's go ahead and close this A tag. And let's say this is a link. And let's see what happens. When I go back here and refresh my page, looks like a link. But when I click it, it doesn't actually go anywhere. So what I want to do here is href is equal to, and I want the full link to any website, including the HTTP part. That's vital. You need the HTTP every single time you want an absolute link. So let's go ahead and go to Instagram.com. So all I did there was HTTP or HTTPS. Most websites have that S these days. :// and then the website, so Instagram.com. And actually this slash isn't even necessary. Let's go ahead and save that and refresh. And when I go over here, you can see the link has actually changed to a blue because I haven't clicked it yet. And let's click the link. And look at that, it brought me to Instagram. So I'm gonna go back, and maybe I don't want Instagram, maybe I want something a little less personal. Let's go to Google. So go ahead, save, refresh, and you can see at the bottom left it says https google.com. Click that, and boom, it brings us to Google. And that's all there is to really adding a link to any page that you have. So again, it's the A element for anchor, the href attribute is equal to quotation, and then your website URL, that link, and then some text. So we can say this is going to go to Google. And because that's going on to 2 lines in my editor, I'm just gonna put this on 2 different lines. And again, white space does not matter. So it doesn't matter that I have all these different spaces in here. I can still go back to my browser, hit refresh. The only thing that changes is the text, not the extra spacing. And so it changed the text. This is going to go to Google. And it does. Now that's nice, but what if you want to link to your own web page? Well, that's a little bit different because you can see up here, there's no HTTPS. This is a file, and you could theoretically link to it, but you don't want to because, well, I'm on a Mac, so it starts with file, but if you're on Windows, it starts with C. And if you're on Linux, it's just a slash. So it's not going to work for everybody, and we need to make sure that works on every operating system. And the way we get around that is using a relative link. So a relative link looks almost identical to an absolute link, or an absolute anchor. We can do href is equal to, we have our quotations in here, and let's go and say second page.html. We'll close that opening tag and say this goes to the second page. And we always close, anytime we have text inside of an element, we always close it with a closing tag. And let's take a look at this. And we can see these links are side by side. So we know from the last lesson that these are inline elements because they work side by side, which means we could put them inside of a paragraph nicely. And when I click this goes to a second page, at the bottom left, you can actually see that it's going to users Caleb Tallien desktop second page.html, and this actually doesn't exist. So when I click this link, it goes to a 404 page. 404 just means your page doesn't exist. It says your file was not found, it may have been moved or deleted. Emphasis on that, if you're moving files from one folder to another folder, it may be moved or deleted. And basically it's saying that the file doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and make this file exist. I'm going to close this tab because that's not needed. And let's do this. I'm going to copy this whole page, and I'm going to go File, Save As, and wherever you have hello world.html, let's call this one second page.html. Save. And so now we have a second page.html, and I can File Open or Command O or Control O and open up hello world, and now we have 2 files side by side. So the second page one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete pretty much everything inside of the body. So let's go and delete all this stuff. Let's change the title to second page. And let's say an H1. This is the second page. That's all we're going to do. So I saved that. And when I come back here, this now exists at this file location on my computer. And if I hit refresh, it actually works. So if I go back, refresh this just for good housekeeping. If I refresh this and I say this goes to second page, it was 404 and it was saying there was a missing file or a missing page. Now it's not. Now it's going to actually load the page for me. Lastly, on our second page, let's go ahead and add one more anchor link back to our hello world page. And let's say hello world.html. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is this is not an absolute link. It does not start with HTTP. It is not an absolute link. This just says go to this particular file, which happens to be in the same folder as second page. So these are side by side in the same folder. And it's going to say, oh, look for this particular file. So it's actually linking to another file, not necessarily a web page. And that gets a little bit into how pages are actually served on a server, basically because a server is just someone else's computer. But this one could say, go back to home. Save, refresh. Let's go back to home. I'm going to make that just a touch bigger here. So this is our second page. Go back to home. And we now have 2 pages that link to each other. And if you give this a shot and you get this to work, that means you have successfully created a network of pages. You don't just have a web page now, you have a web site. Okay, let's take a look at opening a link in a new window. So we probably all know that you can control or command click a link, and this is going to open up in a new tab. And maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want to force people to, every time they click a link, open in a new tab, which could be the same as right-clicking and open link in new tab. But if we want to force this on someone, we actually have that power. So I'm going to go over to helloworld.html, and for Google, every time they go to an external page, because this is an internal page or a relative page, and this is an external website or an absolute link, we can say target is equal to, and this one looks a little weird, there's an underscore there, but target is equal to blank. And so this is our attribute, is equal to apostrophe, underscore blank is the value, has to be that, underscore blank, and then our closing attribute, quotation mark. Let's go ahead and save that, and let's just refresh this page. And now it doesn't look like anything has changed, but when I click this, I'm not going to command click or control click. I'm not going to right click and click open link in new tab. I'm just going to click this link and it's going to open in a new tab for me automatically. Just like that, we now have 2 tabs. And so that's how you open a link in a new tab. All right, let's look at adding an image to our page. So for an image, we actually need an image file. And I like to go to this place called unsplash.com. And we can just use free royalty-free images. And I just want any image. It doesn't really matter what the image is, although this one is pretty perfect. It has a laptop. That's pretty much what I want. Click, and I'm going to download this, and I'm going to download the largest one that I want, just so I can really make, I guess, a good example of this in just a second. Well, maybe not too large. That's a pretty big image. But let's download the large one. And now this is going to go into my downloads folder, and I actually want this to live beside my Hello World and second page, and that's on my desktop. So I need to open up that folder and move it into my desktop. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So if I just copy this file here, go over to my desktop, paste it, and where are you? Right there. Let's call this Caleb's image. It's not actually my image. I didn't take this image. XPS took this image, but I'm going to call it Caleb's image just for the sake of keeping it simple. So let's go back to here, and then let's go, let's close that. We don't need that open anymore. And let's go to VS Code. And now let's add an image. Now this is interesting because images don't have text. So does it need a closing tag? And the answer actually is no. So let's go ahead and create an H3 in here. H3, let's call this images. And to create a new image is the img tag. It's not image, it's img. Now if I close this, there's actually 2 ways to close this. So this is a self-closing tag, meaning it does not have /image. That's not how this one works, because there's no text, there's nothing else to display. Instead, we're going to use an attribute. And so we can just say there's an image here, and you might actually see it close like this. This is called XHTML. This is an older way of doing things and totally valid still. I write a lot of code this way because I'm a little older school, but it's still completely valid. Or you can just write img, and you want the source of the image, the src for source, is equal to Caleb's image dot. Now this is important. You need to know that file extension. And that file extension here was .jpeg, JPG. Now if yours is uppercase .jpg like this or like this, make sure it matches. It has to be perfect. So mine was not that. Mine was .jpg. I can go ahead and save this, and let's scroll down to where it's supposed to show up, and we're going to see this giant image. And this is actually why I wanted this huge image here, is because this was a really large image. Now, cool, the image showed up, but it's just way too big. Now what we can do is we can add a second attribute. We can say the width is supposed to be, and this is going to be in pixels, let's say 500. Let's go ahead and save that. And what this is going to do is make that image a width of 500 and automatically scale the height for me. So if I right click and inspect, what's cool about this, it says width 500, but you can actually see as I hover over the image, it says the image is 500 by 281 by 0.25. Now, if we wanted to skew this, and I don't know why you would want to, but if you ever wanted to skew an image, you can add a width and a height. And you could say the height is going to be, let's say, 200. So this is going to look a little bit off now. You can see it's a little bit squishier. Let's make this pretty extreme and change the height to 100. So now we have 500 by 100. If I hover over, you can actually see over in my viewport, it says IMG 500 by 100. Now, maybe we don't want to scale an image by its width. Maybe we want to scale it by its height. And there will be times where you want to scale an image by its height or just its width, one or the other, not necessarily both. So let's say for whatever reason, we're working with a designer and the designer says, no, the image has to be a maximum height of 100 pixels. And we say, okay, height is equal to 100, save, and let's go ahead and refresh. This is now a height of 100 and a width, whatever that automatically was, is 177.77, and our browser works that out for us. So just as a recap, we could say we have an image element. There's no closing tag because, well, what are we going to close? There's no content to put between two tags. We're using attributes here. The source, the src, is equal to caleb'simage.jpg, and this could also be a link to a particular image on the web like http website.com/image.jpg. It could be something like that. It can use absolute or relative URLs, and so we're using a relative URL. We have a second attribute, width is equal to 500. Third attribute, height is equal to 100, and this makes our really weird looking image. And this entire thing is the image element. Now there's a lot more we could add, and actually I'm going to add this in here anyways. Two things. Let's go ahead, because this is getting kind of big. Let's throw this on separate lines, just because, we can, because white space doesn't matter. And let's add an alt. And alt is going to be the text that shows up when a screen reader is trying to read your image, trying to describe what the image is, or if the text, or not the text, but if the image breaks, what text to show. So show me. And let's go ahead and change this to .missing.image. So this is not a file on my computer. This is not going to work. This image is going to break for me. And you can see broken image and it says show me. That's the alt text. And if I just undo that, I'm just changing it back to my regular image here. The alt text doesn't show up. That's perfect. We don't want it to show up. We want the image to show up. But just in case the image doesn't show up, we have a fallback. So that's how we add an image. What I would like you to do now is add an image to your page, to your Hello World page. Remember, you can get any sort of images you want from unsplash.com and just use any image that you like. It doesn't really matter what the image is. Okay, welcome back. Hello, hello, hello. In the last video, we created an image. We used the src, width, height, and the alt attributes. In this video, in this lesson, what we're going to do is make this a link, because if I go back to my page, I can't click that. It goes nowhere. And we need this to actually go somewhere. Well, we don't need to, but maybe we want this to. Maybe we want this to go to our second page.html. So let's go ahead and wrap our image in an anchor. So we say href is equal to, and I can fill that in just a second. I'm going to select that, and all I'm doing is tabbing this in, just because I am pretty keen on nice tabbing. And then we do /a. So we have an opening tag and a closing tag, and that means it's going to go around our image. And then for our href, let's do second page.html. And that's going to go to our second page.html. And so if I refresh this, it looks like nothing's changed, but I can now actually click it. You can see at the bottom left there, it says second page.html. If I click this, it goes to my page. Go back home, scroll on down, and now we have an image that goes to another page. Now, all we've really done here is nested an image inside of an anchor tag. And this is why nesting was really important to learn to begin with. We learned about images, we learned about anchor tags, and now we're just mixing the two together. So what I would like you to do is this exact same thing. Grab an image, whatever image from unsplash.com, make sure it shows up on your page, and then link to another page. You could even just link to google.com if you wanted to, or some other web page out there if you don't have a second page already built out. You can link to anywhere on the internet, your Facebook profile, your LinkedIn profile, anything like that.